Have you ever been betrayed by the person you sacrificed everything for? I asked myself this question as I stood in the doorway of the bedroom I'd called mine for the past 7 years, staring at 2 hastily packed suitcases. My son, Marcus, had given me 48 hours to figure something out, his exact words. After raising him alone for 26 years, after postponing my own dreams so he could chase his, after everything, this was how it ended, with an eviction notice from my own flesh and blood. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The irony? That sleek downtown office where he went every morning, wearing tailored suits that I had once helped him afford. That company he was so proud of running. It belonged to me. Every brick, every share, every decision that he thought was his to make, all of it was mine. And he had no idea. My name is Eleanor Williams. 3 days ago, I was a recently retired elementary school teacher looking forward to quiet mornings, with coffee on my son's garden terrace. Today, I'm the secret owner of Pinnacle Innovations, watching my son make the biggest mistake of his life. This isn't a story about revenge, though there were moments I wanted nothing more. It's about the invisible threads that bind parents and children, about the choices we make for love, and the painful lessons that sometimes can only be taught through loss. Let me take you back to the beginning. 32 years ago, I was a young widow with a 4-year-old son and a mountain of medical debt from my husband James's battle with cancer. James had been the dreamer between us, brilliant, ambitious, always reaching for more than what seemed possible. I was the practical one, the planner, the safety net. When he died, he left behind little more than his unfinished designs for a revolutionary water filtration system and the mortgage on our small Minneapolis home. Those first years were a blur of grief and struggle. I took any job I could find, waitressing at night, administrative work during school hours, tutoring on weekends. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford. But every sacrifice was worth it when I looked at Marcus, with his father's curious eyes and that same spark of brilliance. By the time Marcus was 12, I had managed to put myself through night school and secured a teaching position at Lakeview Elementary. The pay wasn't much, but the schedule allowed me to be there when Marcus came home, to help with homework, to make sure he never felt the absence of his father too keenly. "Mom, look at this," he'd say almost every day, showing me some new invention or design he'd sketched. "Do you think Dad would have liked it?" "He would have loved it," I always answered. And it was true. What Marcus didn't know was that I spent my evenings at the dining room table after he went to bed, working through his father's old notebooks, refining those water filtration designs. James had been onto something revolutionary. A low-cost, energy-efficient system that could transform contaminated water into something drinkable, using a fraction of the resources of conventional methods. The science was sound, but the engineering needed work. I wasn't an engineer, but I was determined. I taught myself fluid dynamics from textbooks borrowed from the library. I connected with one of James's former colleagues, Dr. Alan Mercer, who saw the potential in the designs and agreed to help refine them in exchange for a modest stake in whatever might come of it. "This could change millions of lives, Eleanor," Alan told me one evening as we reviewed the latest prototype tests. "James would be proud of what you're doing." When Marcus was 16, I made my first patent application using my maiden name, Eleanor Reynolds. It was easier that way, keeping this part of my life separate, protected. The patent was approved a year later. By then, I had connected with Garrett Fujimoto, a venture capitalist with a reputation for backing environmentally sustainable technologies. "I've never seen anything like this," Garrett said, examining our working model. "With the right team, this could be a global game changer." I negotiated the terms carefully. 51% ownership would remain with me, operating through a holding company called Legacy Innovations. The name was my private tribute to James, The company would be established in Seattle, far from our Minneapolis home, with Garrett as the public face. My involvement would remain confidential, a stipulation I insisted on. May I ask why? Garrett had questioned. My son, I replied simply. I don't want him feeling entitled to something he hasn't earned, and I don't want the burden of this legacy unless he's ready for it. Garrett seemed to understand. We shook hands, and Pinnacle Innovations was born, though it wasn't called that yet. The early years were lean, with more setbacks than victories. But the technology worked. First came government contracts for disaster relief, then international development organizations. By the time Marcus graduated high school, the company was stable enough that I could use my quarterly dividends to send him to the engineering program at MIT, his father's dream school. I can't believe this, Mom, he said, holding the acceptance letter. How can we possibly afford this? I've been saving since you were born, I told him. It wasn't entirely a lie. And there are scholarships, loans. We'll make it work. What I didn't tell him was that I had already made it work. That the company built on his father's designs was now funding his education. I wanted him to work hard, to believe he was making his own way. Perhaps that was my first mistake. Marcus thrived at MIT, graduating with honors. When he called to tell me about a job offer from a company called Pinnacle Innovations in Seattle, my heart nearly stopped. They're doing amazing work with water purification technology, Mom, he explained, excitedly. It's exactly the kind of meaningful engineering Dad would have wanted me to do. I should have told him then. That was my second mistake. Instead, I called Garrett. Your son is brilliant, Eleanor, he assured me. This isn't nepotism. He earned this interview on his own merits. We had no idea of the connection until HR flagged the address on his application. Treat him like any other candidate, I insisted. Better yet, be harder on him. He needs to earn his place. Marcus got the job, and over the next 7 years, he rose through the ranks on his own merit, eventually becoming COO when Garrett stepped back for health reasons. My quarterly board meetings, conducted remotely under my maiden name with a carefully curated video background, became an elaborate dance of deception. Through it all, I remained a teacher, retiring just 3 months ago after 30 years at Lakeview Elementary. When my apartment building announced it was converting to condominiums beyond my apparent means, Marcus insisted I move in with him. It's a big house, Mom. You put your life on hold for me. Let me do this for you. I accepted, with a grateful heart, believing we'd finally reached a place where the truth could come out. I planned to tell him everything after I settled in. That was before Vanessa came into the picture, and before Marcus gave me 2 days to pack my things and leave. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I moved into Marcus's Magnolia neighborhood home in Seattle 3 months ago, just days after my retirement party at Lakeview Elementary. 30 years of teaching had ended with cupcakes, hand-drawn cards, and a few tears from students who'd grown attached during their 4th grade year. My principal, Diane, had hugged me tightly and whispered, "What will you do now, Eleanor? You've never been one to sit still." I had smiled mysteriously. I might finally have time to tell some long overdue truths. The Seattle autumn welcomed me with crisp mornings and golden light. Marcus's home was everything my teacher's salary supposedly couldn't afford. A renovated craftsman with 3 bedrooms, a gourmet kitchen, and a view of Puget Sound from the upstairs windows. The guest room he'd prepared for me faced east, catching the morning sun. He'd even bought new bedding. "In my favorite shade of blue, is it okay?" he asked anxiously that first day, hovering in the doorway as I unpacked my small suitcase. "I can get different curtains if you don't like these." It touched me, this careful consideration from my son who had once been too busy with science fairs and engineering camps to notice such details. I assured him everything was perfect. Those first weeks had a dreamlike quality. I'd wake early, make coffee, and sit on the back deck watching ferries cross the Sound. Sometimes Marcus would join me before heading to the office, and we'd have conversations about nothing important. The neighbor's garden, an article he'd read, whether the Seahawks stood a chance this season. It felt like rediscovering each other after years of career-focused phone calls and holiday visits. What Marcus didn't know was that on Tuesdays, after he left for work, I would close the blinds in my bedroom, set up my laptop, and log into quarterly board meetings as Eleanor Reynolds, majority shareholder of Pinnacle Innovations. I used a digital background of a nondescript office, wore reading glasses I didn't need, and kept my silver-streaked hair pulled back severely. Small disguises. That, combined with the poor quality of most video calls, had successfully kept my identity separate. The company had grown beyond anything James or I could have imagined. From that initial water filtration technology, Pinnacle had expanded into comprehensive water management systems, with projects in 27 countries. The original patent had spawned dozens of others. We employed over 300 people, with Marcus overseeing operations as COO since Garrett's semi-retirement 2 years earlier. Reynolds Holdings may want to consider the acquisition offer from Meridian Global, our CFO had suggested during September's meeting. The valuation is quite favorable. Not interested, I replied firmly. Pinnacle stays independent. What I couldn't explain to the board was that Pinnacle wasn't just a company to me. It was James's legacy, Marcus's future inheritance, the culmination of decades of sacrifice. I had planned to reveal everything to Marcus by Christmas, to explain why I had kept this secret for so long, to finally share with him the full story of his father's brilliance and my own quiet determination. But then came the October charity gala. Marcus had invited me as his +1 to Pinnacle's annual fundraiser for global water initiatives. "You'll finally get to see what I do, Mom," he said excitedly, "and meet everyone I work with." I had begged off, claiming migraines, fear of crowds, any excuse to avoid being recognized by board members who knew me as Eleanor Reynolds. But Marcus was insistent. "Please, Mom, this matters to me." I finally agreed, with a plan to arrive late, keep to the shadows, and leave early. I spent hours choosing an outfit unlike anything Eleanor Reynolds would wear. A deep purple dress, costume jewelry, my hair styled differently than my usual board meeting appearance. The gala was held at the Olympic Sculpture Park, with the pavilion transformed by blue lighting and flowing fabric meant to evoke water. I arrived 30 minutes after the scheduled start, slipping in quietly while Marcus was deep in conversation with the mayor. I kept to the periphery, nursing a single glass of champagne, admiring how confidently my son moved through the room. His father would have been so proud. "Eleanor? Eleanor Reynolds?" I froze at the sound of Garrett's voice behind me. When I turned, his eyes widened with recognition and confusion. "It is you. What are you doing here? I thought you couldn't make it to Seattle for the gala." Before I could respond, Marcus appeared at my side, smiling broadly. "I see you've met my mother, Garrett. Mom, this is Garrett Fujimoto, our founder, and Chairman Emeritus." I watched the realization dawn on Garrett's face, the pieces falling into place after years of video calls and separate identities. "Your mother?" he repeated slowly. "Eleanor Williams," I said, extending my hand with what I hoped was a convincing smile. "It's lovely to meet one of Marcus's mentors. He speaks so highly of you." To his credit, Garrett recovered quickly, taking my hand and playing along. "The pleasure is mine. Marcus never mentioned his mother was so accomplished. 4th grade. Teachers rarely make the news," I replied lightly. Garrett excused himself shortly after, but the damage was done. He called me the next morning, demanding answers. 20 years, Eleanor. 20 years of partnership. And I never knew Marcus was your son? Why the deception? And why reveal yourself now? I explained my reasons. Wanting Marcus to succeed on his own merits, protecting him from the burden of his father's legacy until he was ready. "I'm going to tell him everything," I assured Garrett. At Christmas. It's time. Garrett wasn't happy, but he agreed to keep my secret a few more months. What neither of us anticipated was Vanessa Chen. She arrived in Marcus's life like a carefully targeted missile. I met her 2 weeks after the gala, a stunning woman with impeccable credentials, Stanford MBA, McKinsey consulting experience, and a seemingly genuine interest in water conservation. She had recently joined Pinnacle's business development team and had, as Marcus shyly admitted, caught his attention immediately. Their courtship was a whirlwind. Within a month, Vanessa was spending weekends at the house. I tried to make myself scarce, taking long walks around the neighborhood or visiting the art museum, giving them space. When we did interact, Vanessa was unfailingly polite, asking thoughtful questions about my teaching career, complimenting my cooking, bringing small gifts, chocolates, hand cream, a scarf in my favorite blue. Yet something felt off. I caught her watching me sometimes with a calculating look that disappeared the moment she noticed my attention. She asked questions that seemed casual but probed at financial matters. Had I saved enough for retirement? Was my pension substantial? Did I have investments? Marcus gently chided me when I mentioned my unease. Mom, she's just trying to get to know you. And she works in finance. Those questions are normal to her. I tried to believe him. But then came the morning I overheard them in the kitchen, speaking in hushed tones. We need more space, Marcus, Vanessa was saying. This house is perfect for entertaining clients. We could host dinner parties that would cement those international contracts. I know, but what about Mom? She just moved in. There are lovely retirement communities nearby, very active social places. She'd probably be happier there with people her own age. I can't just ask her to leave, after everything she's done for me. Vanessa's voice softened. Of course not. But this is your life, Marcus. Our future. You've done enough for her already. I backed away silently, heart pounding. That afternoon, I made excuses to leave the house, driving to a coffee shop where I could think. Something about Vanessa's interest in Marcus felt too convenient, too calculated. I called Alan Mercer, who still consulted occasionally for Pinnacle. What do you know about Vanessa Chen? I asked without preamble. His pause spoke volumes. Eleanor, I've been meaning to call you. She's been asking very specific questions about the original patents, the ownership structure, about Reynolds Holdings. A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Has she now? 2 days later, I found financial documents on Marcus's home office desk. Papers he'd clearly tried to hide when I knocked. Acquisition proposals from Meridian Global, the same company that had approached the board. Sticky notes, inelegant. Handwriting, Vanessa's, marked key sections about majority shareholding and transfer of ownership rights. Something was very wrong. I needed time to investigate, to warn Marcus before he made a terrible mistake. But I never got the chance. That evening, Marcus came home late. I heard the front door close softly around 10 p.m., followed by hushed voices in the foyer. Marcus and Vanessa, returning from what he'd told me would be a business dinner. I was sitting in the darkness of my bedroom, the acquisition documents spread across my lap, illuminated only by the small reading lamp on my nightstand. I had spent the afternoon digging through whatever information I could access about Vanessa Chen. What I discovered disturbed me deeply. Before joining Pinnacle, she had worked briefly for 3 different clean tech companies. Each time, she had developed relationships with key executives. Each time, those companies had been acquired by larger corporations shortly after her departure. And each time, the executives she'd been close to had received generous compensation packages, while long-term employees were laid off in restructuring. Meridian Global, the company trying to acquire Pinnacle, had been the buyer in 2 of those cases. This wasn't coincidence. This was a pattern. I listened as Marcus and Vanessa moved to the kitchen. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Ice clinked in glasses. Their voices remained low, but with an intensity that carried even if the words didn't. I rose quietly and moved to my door, easing it open just enough to hear more clearly. "Still don't understand why it has to be so soon," Marcus was saying, his voice strained. "The Meridian offer expires at the end of the month," Vanessa replied. "This is your chance, Marcus. CEO of the merged companies, a compensation package that would set you up for life. But we don't even know who owns the majority stake. This mysterious Reynolds Holdings? My sources say it's a single person, someone who's ready to sell. Reynolds just needs convincing to accept Meridian's terms rather than looking for other buyers." My hands clenched into fists. What sources did she have? The ownership structure was confidential, known only to the board and our most senior legal counsel. And my mother... Marcus sounded torn. "It feels wrong to ask her to leave so suddenly." "We've been through this." Vanessa's tone softened, persuasive. "You've supported her your entire life. You've given her a home these past months. But this merger requires your full attention, and we'll need to entertain executives, host strategy sessions. Your focus needs to be on your future, not on caretaking." "She's not a burden, Vanessa. Of course not. But she is a distraction. And right now, you can't afford distractions." A long silence followed. Then Marcus sighed. That same heavy exhale he'd made as a teenager when conceding an argument. "I'll talk to her tomorrow." I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. Against my ribs, a curious mixture of hurt and rage building inside me. Caretaking? Distraction? After everything I had sacrificed? Everything I had built? I returned to my bed, gathering the acquisition documents with trembling hands. I had a decision to make. I could reveal everything now. Show Marcus the paperwork proving I was the majority shareholder he was so desperate to identify. I could expose Vanessa's apparent connection to Meridian, her history of facilitating corporate takeovers. I could reclaim control of Pinnacle openly. But what would that accomplish? Would Marcus believe me? Or would he see it as a desperate ploy from a mother he now viewed as a burden? Would he understand the reasons behind my decades of secrecy? Or would he feel betrayed, manipulated, and, if I revealed myself now in anger, would it forever change how Marcus viewed his own accomplishments? Would he suddenly question whether his rise through Pinnacle's ranks had been merit-based or merely his mother's invisible hand guiding his path? No. I needed to be strategic, to think beyond my wounded pride. I slipped the documents into a folder and hid it beneath my mattress. Then I opened my laptop and sent 2 emails, one to Garrett, asking him to block any board action on the Meridian offer until further notice, and another to my attorney, requesting an urgent meeting tomorrow morning. I barely slept that night, listening to the occasional murmur of voices from the other side of the house, the sound of laughter that felt like salt in an open wound. By dawn, I had made my decision. I would let Marcus ask me to leave. I would go quietly, without revealing who I truly was, and then I would show him, and Vanessa, exactly who they were dealing with. The confrontation came at breakfast. I was at the kitchen counter, methodically slicing a grapefruit, when Marcus entered. He looked haggard, eyes shadowed from what I suspected was a similarly sleepless night. Vanessa wasn't with him. "Mom," he began, pouring himself coffee with unsteady hands. "We need to talk about something." I kept my expression neutral. "Of course, sweetheart. What is it?" He couldn't quite meet my eyes. "You know I've loved having you here these past months." "But?" I prompted when he didn't continue. He set his mug down with a sharp click against the countertop. "But there are some big changes coming at work, a potential merger that would mean a major promotion for me. It's going to require a lot of networking, entertaining at home, late strategy sessions." "That sounds exciting," I said carefully. "Congratulations." "Thanks." He rubbed the back of his neck, a gesture so like his father it made my heart ache. The thing is, Vanessa and I have been talking and we think it might be better if you found your own place, just temporarily, he added quickly, until things settle down. I set down my knife, the grapefruit half-sectioned before me, pale pink and exposed. I see. It's not that we don't want you here, he hurried on. It's just that the timing. How much time do I have? I asked quietly. He blinked, thrown by my direct question. What? To find somewhere else to live. How much time do I have? Oh. He looked even more uncomfortable. Well, the merger announcement would be next Friday, and there'd be a dinner here that evening with the Meridian executives. So ideally by Thursday? I know it's not much notice. 2 days. My voice was perfectly level. You're giving me 2 days to find somewhere to live. Mom, After 30 years of teaching, I've been retired for exactly 12 weeks. I haven't even finished unpacking. I looked around the kitchen that I had kept spotless, the home I had thought might finally be a place to rest. 2 days. Marcus, flushed. I'll help you find somewhere. And of course, I'll cover any costs until you get settled. It's just temporary, I promise. I nodded slowly, as if considering. In truth, my mind was already racing ahead, plotting my next moves. All right, Marcus, if that's what you need. His relief was palpable, and somehow that hurt most of all. That he had expected resistance, anger, tears perhaps, but not this calm acceptance. Thanks, Mom. I'll start looking at some places today. Maybe that senior community in Ballard? They have activities, an indoor pool. Don't worry about it, I said, picking up my knife again. I'll figure something out. As I resumed slicing, my grapefruit with precise, methodical cuts, I made a silent promise to myself. In 2 days, Marcus would learn exactly who had built the company he was so eager to trade away. He would discover what happened when you discarded people who had devoted their lives to your success. And Vanessa Chen would learn that she had gravely underestimated the retired school teacher she so casually dismissed as a distraction. I maintained my composure until Marcus left for work. The moment his car pulled out of the driveway, I allowed myself 10 minutes, precisely 10 minutes, to feel the full force of his betrayal. I sat at the kitchen table, hands flat against the cool surface, and let the tears come. Not loud, dramatic sobs, but the quiet weeping of a woman who had expected better from the child she raised. The kitchen clock ticked steadily. When exactly 10 minutes had passed, I wiped my eyes, straightened my shoulders, and got to work. My first call was to Garrett. We need to meet. Today, in person. Eleanor, I'm in Vancouver for a conference. Cancel it. This is about Meridian and Vanessa Chen. His sharp intake of breath told me he understood the gravity of the situation. I'll be at my house in 2 hours. Next, I called my attorney, Clara Winters. We had worked together for over 15 years, and she was one of the few people who knew my dual identity. Marcus is being manipulated into a merger with Meridian, I explained. I need to enact the contingency plan we discussed last year. The nuclear option? Clara sounded surprised. Are you certain? Absolutely certain. And I need it ready by tomorrow. After ending the call, I went to my bedroom and methodically began to pack. Not everything, that would come later, but enough to make it appear I was complying with Marcus's request. I could feel a strange calm settling over me, the same focused determination that had carried me through James's illness, through years of single parenthood, through building a company in secret while teaching full-time. At precisely noon, I arrived at Garrett's waterfront home in Medina. He looked troubled as he ushered me inside. You've confirmed the connection between Vanessa and Meridian? I asked without preamble. Garrett nodded grimly. My security team pulled her background this morning. She worked for a subsidiary of Meridian 3 years ago, though it's carefully obscured on her resume. and she's had regular meetings with Thomas. Holloway, Meridian's acquisition director, I murmured. This confirmed my suspicions. Eleanor, I feel responsible. We hired her. We gave her access. I waved away his concern. She's good at what she does, Garrett. None of this is your fault. I moved to his floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing out at Lake Washington. What matters now is how we respond. The board won't approve a sale without your consent, he reminded me. You still control everything. It's not just about stopping the sale. It's about protecting Pinnacle's future and teaching my son a lesson he desperately needs to learn. I turned back to face him. I need your help with something very specific. For the next hour we planned. Garrett made calls to trusted board members, subtly alerting them to concerns about the Meridian offer without revealing the personal dimension. I provided him with a list of documents I needed from the company archives: original patent filings, founding investment agreements, early corporate minutes that established my controlling interest. Are you going to tell Marcus everything? Garrett asked as I prepared to leave. He'll know soon enough. I hesitated at the door. Just promise me one thing. When this is all over, help him understand why I kept this secret for so long. That it was never about control or manipulation. It was about letting him become his own man, Garrett finished quietly. I understand, Eleanor. I always have. Back at Marcus's house, I discovered Vanessa had arrived while I was out. She was in the living room, measuring windows with a tape measure, making notes on her phone. She startled when she saw me. Eleanor, I didn't hear you come in. Clearly, I replied, noting the fabric swatches spread across the sofa, rich burgundies, and emeralds that would replace the calm blues Marcus and I both preferred. Redecorating already? A flicker of annoyance crossed her perfect features before she smoothed it into a sympathetic smile. Just gathering some ideas for after the merger announcement. We'll be doing a lot of entertaining. She glanced at the small suitcase I'd left by the stairs. Marcus told me about your conversation this morning. I want you to know this wasn't my idea. The brazenness of her lie was almost impressive. Of course not, I said with equal insincerity. Marcus has always been so decisive, acting entirely on his own. She missed the sarcasm or chose to ignore it. I've actually been researching some lovely retirement communities. There's one near Green Lake with its own theater and art studio. Teachers get a discount. How thoughtful. I moved toward the stairs, then paused. Actually, Vanessa, since you're here, I have a question about Pinnacle. Marcus mentioned a merger? Her expression grew instantly guarded. He shouldn't be discussing that outside the company. It's confidential. Oh, I'm sure it's fine. Family, you know? I kept my tone casual. It just surprised me. I thought Pinnacle was doing well on its own. It is, she said with rehearsed enthusiasm. But this merger with Meridian would provide global reach, resources for expansion. Marcus would become CEO of the combined water division. It's an incredible opportunity. And Pinnacle's original patents? What happens to those? Her eyes narrowed slightly. They'd be part of the merged company's assets, of course. Why do you ask? Just curious about my son's future? I smiled blandly. Those patents must be quite valuable after all these years. Worth millions, she confirmed, then seemed to catch herself. But the real value is in the company's potential for growth under Meridian's umbrella. I see. Well, I should continue packing. I gestured to the fabric swatches. Don't let me interrupt your planning. In my bedroom, I closed the door and leaned against it, processing what I'd just confirmed. Vanessa didn't know I was the majority shareholder. That much was clear from her unguarded comments about the patents. She believed she was manipulating Marcus into a merger that would benefit them both, unaware that I could stop it with a single phone call. But simply stopping the merger wouldn't solve the real problem. My son's willingness to discard family, Loyalty for professional gain, his vulnerability to manipulation, his failure to recognize Vanessa's true motives. My phone vibrated with a text from Clara. Documents ready. Meeting set for 9 a.m. tomorrow. I texted back. Perfect. That evening, Marcus came home late again. I heard him moving around downstairs, opening and closing the refrigerator, running water in the kitchen sink. Eventually, his footsteps climbed the stairs and paused outside my door. "Mom?" he called softly. "Are you awake?" I didn't answer, pretending to be asleep. I wasn't ready to face him yet, afraid that my carefully constructed plan might crumble in the face of maternal love. Through the door, I heard his sigh, followed by a barely audible, "I'm sorry." But sorry wasn't enough. Not this time. Tomorrow would change everything. Morning arrived with a steady Seattle drizzle, the kind of soft, persistent rain that seems to blur the edges of reality. I dressed carefully in clothes I hadn't worn in years. A tailored charcoal pantsuit, pearl earrings, low heels. Not Eleanor Williams, retired elementary school teacher, but Eleanor Reynolds, CEO and majority shareholder of Pinnacle Innovations. I left the house before Marcus woke, leaving. Only a brief note on the kitchen counter. Looking at apartments. Back later. By 8:45, I was seated in Clara's downtown office, reviewing the documents she'd prepared overnight. Everything was in order. Power of attorney forms, official company letterhead with my true title, resolutions ready for my signature. "Are you absolutely certain about this approach?" Clara asked, not for the first time. "It's aggressive. Once you take these steps, there's no going back to the way things were with Marcus." "They already changed when he gave me 48 hours to leave his home," I replied. "I'm just making sure he understands exactly what he's done." At precisely 9:30, my phone rang. Garrett, right on schedule. "They're all here in the main conference room," he confirmed. "Marcus, Vanessa, and Thomas Holloway from Meridian. They think this is a preliminary merger discussion." "Perfect. I'm on my way." Clara accompanied me to Pinnacle's headquarters, a sleek glass building overlooking Lake Union. I'd only been here once before, years ago during construction and never during business hours. As we entered the lobby, the receptionist looked up with a professional smile. "Good morning. How may I help you?" "Eleanor Reynolds to see Garrett Fujimoto," I said, the name feeling strange on my lips after so many years of careful separation. "I believe I'm expected." Her eyes widened slightly as she checked her system. "Of course, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Fujimoto asked me to bring you directly to the executive conference room." As we followed her through the open office space, I noticed heads turning, whispers spreading. Eleanor Reynolds, the reclusive majority shareholder, was finally making an in-person appearance. I kept my gaze forward, chin high, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Outside the conference room, Garrett was waiting. He squeezed my hand briefly. "Ready?" I nodded. "It's time." The receptionist opened the door, and Garrett stepped in first. "Sorry for the delay," he announced, "but our final participant has arrived." I walked in behind him, Clara following close, behind. The room fell silent. Marcus was halfway through a sentence, his hand frozen mid-gesture. Beside him, Vanessa looked professionally composed, though her eyes narrowed slightly at the interruption. A silver-haired man I recognized as Thomas Holloway from Meridian sat at the far end, his expression curious. But all I could see was my son's face as recognition dawned. "Mom?" Marcus's voice cracked in confusion. "What are you doing here?" I set my briefcase on the table with a decisive click. "I believe I was invited to discuss the future of my company." Vanessa recovered first. "I'm sorry. There must be some mistake. This is a confidential meeting about Meridian Global's proposed acquisition of Pinnacle Innovations," I finished for her. "Yes, I'm well aware." Thomas Holloway stood, extending his hand. "Ms. Reynolds, I presume?" I've been trying to arrange a meeting with you for months. Mr. Holloway. I shook his hand briefly. I apologize for the theatrics, but it seemed the most efficient way to address several issues at once. Marcus looked between us, confusion giving way to dawning horror. Reynolds? Mom? What's going on? I turned to face my son directly. Eleanor Reynolds is my maiden name, Marcus. I'm the majority shareholder of Pinnacle Innovations. I have been since before you were born. The color drained from his face. That's not possible. I assure you, it is. I nodded to Clara, who distributed folders to everyone at the table. These documents confirm my ownership position. The company was built on your father's original water filtration patents, which I developed after his death and commercialized with Garrett's help. Vanessa was flipping frantically through the documents, her composure cracking. This is some kind of trick. You're a teacher. I was both, I said simply. For over 30 years. Thomas Holloway leaned back in his chair, a calculating look replacing his initial surprise. Well, this is unexpected, but it doesn't change our offer. In fact, knowing the family connection makes me even more confident that we can reach a mutually beneficial agreement. I'm afraid it does change things, Mr. Holloway. I placed my own copy of the folder on the table. Pinnacle Innovations is not for sale. Not to Meridian, not to anyone. Mom. Marcus finally found his voice again, though it shook with emotion. Anger, confusion, betrayal all mingled together. You've been lying to me my entire life? About who you are? About the company? About everything? Not lying, I corrected gently. Protecting you. Protecting your father's legacy until you were ready to understand its true value. By letting me believe I earned my position? That my accomplishments were my own? His voice rose with each question. Was my entire career just you pulling strings behind the scenes? Absolutely not, Garrett interjected firmly. Eleanor was adamant that you received no special treatment. Your rise through the company was entirely on your own merit, Marcus. That's why she kept her identity secret, so you would never doubt your own abilities. Vanessa had recovered enough to attempt damage control. This is all very dramatic, but it doesn't change the fact that Meridian's offer would benefit everyone in this room, including you, Mrs. Williams, or Reynolds, whatever you prefer. I turned my gaze to her, dropping all pretense of politeness. Ms. Chen, I'm fully aware of your connection to Meridian Global. Your history of facilitating corporate takeovers is quite impressive, if somewhat unethical. Her eyes widened in genuine shock. Did you really think I wouldn't investigate the woman who so quickly convinced my son that his mother was a burden to be discarded? I continued, my voice cool but sharp as steel. Who measured my windows for new curtains while suggesting retirement? Communities? Marcus glanced at Vanessa, uncertainty clouding his features. What is she talking about? Vanessa's hand found his arm, squeezing reassuringly. Your mother is obviously upset about being asked to move out. She's trying to create division between us. Am I? I opened another folder and pushed it toward Marcus. These are records of Vanessa's employment history. Note the connection to Meridian subsidiaries. Carefully omitted from the resume she submitted to Pinnacle. And these, I slid over another document, are logs of meetings between Ms. Chen and Mr. Holloway dating back 6 months, well before she began pursuing a relationship with you. The conference room fell into stunned silence. Thomas Holloway studied his fingernails, clearly calculating whether to deny the connection. Vanessa's face had gone rigid, her eyes darting between Marcus and the exit. I don't understand, Marcus said quietly, staring at the documents. Why would you do this, Vanessa? Before she could answer, I stood up, gathering my things. Mr. Holloway, this meeting is over. Pinnacle is not for sale. Ms. Chen, your employment with the company is terminated, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. I turned to my son, whose world was visibly crumbling before my eyes. Part of me wanted to comfort him, to soften the blow. But he needed to face the full consequences of his choices. Marcus, when you've had time to process all of this, we should talk. About the company. About your father. About the future. I paused at the door. And about what it really means to be family. As Clara and I left the conference room, I heard the explosive beginning of what would clearly be a devastating confrontation between Marcus and Vanessa. I had won this battle decisively, but the war for my son's trust was just beginning. I didn't return to Marcus's house that night. Clara had already arranged a suite at the Four Seasons downtown, anticipating that I would need somewhere to stay after the confrontation. As the hotel elevator carried me upward, I felt an overwhelming fatigue settle into my bones, not just physical exhaustion, but a deep emotional weariness. The victory I'd achieved at Pinnacle's headquarters felt hollow now. I had protected the company, exposed Vanessa's deception, and reclaimed my true identity. But at what cost? The look on Marcus's face, betrayal, hurt, confusion, haunted me as I entered the elegant suite and set my small overnight bag on a chair. I moved to the window, gazing out at Elliott Bay. Ferries glided across the darkening water, their lights blinking in the gathering dusk. For nearly 4 decades ever since James's death, I had been moving forward with unwavering determination, raising Marcus, teaching, secretly building Pinnacle. My entire life had been structured around purpose, around providing for my son's future while honoring my husband's memory. Now, for the first time, I felt adrift. My phone had been silent all afternoon. No calls from Marcus, no messages, just emails from Garrett confirming that security had escorted Vanessa from the building, and from Clara outlining next steps for formally acknowledging my role at Pinnacle. Around 7, I ordered room service, soup and bread that I barely touched. The television provided background noise as I sat in an armchair, staring at nothing in particular. Outside, the rain had intensified, drumming against the windows, turning Seattle's lights into watery smears. I must have dozed off, because the harsh ring of my phone startled me awake. The bedside clock read 11:47 p.m. Marcus's name flashed on. The screen. Hello? My voice was rough from sleep. Silence then. Why didn't you tell me? His words were slightly slurred. Had he been drinking? Marcus, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. A bitter laugh. My mother has been lying to me my entire life. My girlfriend was using me to facilitate a corporate takeover. I'm pretty fucking far from okay. I winced at the profanity, something Marcus rarely used, especially not with me. Where are you? At home. Our home. The home you let me think I'd earned, when really it was just my allowance from Mommy all along. The bitterness in his voice cut deeper than any anger could have. Did you enjoy watching me struggle to make mortgage payments? Was that part of your master plan for building my character? Marcus, that's not fair. I never. Fair. His voice rose sharply. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair to let your son believe his father died a nobody when he was actually some brilliant inventor? Is it fair to hide the fact that our family owned a multi-million-dollar company while I worked summer jobs to help pay for school supplies? Each question landed like a physical blow. I closed my eyes, gathering strength. I wanted you to have a normal childhood, to develop your own ambitions, not just inherit your father's, to know that whatever success you achieved was genuinely yours. So noble, he sneered. Saint Eleanor, sacrificing everything for her son's moral development. Did it ever occur to you that I had a right to know who I really was? Who my father really was? Yes, I admitted quietly. Many times. I almost told you when you graduated from MIT. Again when you got the job at Pinnacle. Every time I convinced myself to wait until you were more established, until you'd proven to yourself what you could accomplish on your own. And then what? You'd swoop in and reveal that it was all a carefully controlled experiment? Congratulations, Marcus. You passed Mommy's test of worthiness. The crack in his voice betrayed the pain beneath his anger. It wasn't like that. I insisted. I was protecting you. From what? The burden of wealth? The terrible fate of knowing my father was exceptional? The crushing weight of family legacy? His words dripped with sarcasm. Or were you just protecting your control over everything? And everyone? The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Hadn't there been moments when I'd relished my secret power, my ability to shape circumstances while remaining unseen? I made mistakes, I conceded. But everything I did was out of love for you, Marcus. Love? He gave a short, pained laugh. If that's love, I'd hate to see what your indifference looks like. There was a long pause, then his voice came again, quieter but somehow more devastating. You know what hurts the most? Not the lies. Not even finding out about Vanessa. It's realizing that you never trusted me. Not once in 32 years did you think I was worthy of knowing the truth. That's not true. Save it. He cut me off. I don't want to hear any more explanations or justifications. I just called to let you know that I'll be gone when you come to collect your things. Consider it a professional courtesy. One executive to another. Before I could respond, the line went dead. I sat motionless in the darkened hotel room. The phone, still pressed to my ear as if I might hear his voice again if I just listened hard enough. Then, slowly, I set it down on the nightstand. For the first time since James's funeral, I allowed myself to break down completely. Decades of carefully maintained control crumbled as I sobbed, ugly, gasping cries that shook my entire body. I wept for the husband I'd lost too soon, for the childhood my son had never known, for the years of deception that had seemed so necessary at the time. Most of all, I wept for the devastating possibility that in trying to protect Marcus from the burden of his father's legacy, I had destroyed any chance of a real relationship with my only child. Eventually, the tears subsided, leaving me hollow and spent. I moved to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my swollen face. The woman in the mirror looked ancient, the lines around her eyes and mouth carved deep by grief. "What have you done?" I whispered to my reflection. The next morning dawned gray and dismal. I checked out of the hotel and took a car to Marcus's house, dreading what I would find. As promised, he was gone, closets emptied, personal items missing from the bathroom. On the kitchen counter sat a single key with a post-it. "No lockup when you're finished." 4 simple words that somehow conveyed a lifetime of broken trust. I packed methodically, my movements mechanical. The few possessions I'd brought from Minneapolis went into 2 suitcases. The rest, kitchen items I'd purchased, books I'd been reading, the blue bedding Marcus had so carefully chosen, I left behind. None of it mattered anymore. As I prepared to leave, my phone rang. I answered without checking the caller ID, briefly hoping it might be Marcus. "Eleanor? It's Garrett. We have a situation at Pinnacle." I sighed, too emotionally drained to deal with business matters. "Can it wait?" "I'm afraid not. Marcus just resigned, effective immediately. And he's taken the prototype plans for the new desalination system with him." The bottom dropped out of my stomach. "What?" "He emptied his office last night. Left his resignation letter with security. The secure server was accessed at 2 a.m. All the files for the next generation technology have been downloaded." I sank onto a kitchen stool, trying to process this new blow. That's proprietary technology worth millions. Where would he go? Garrett's voice was grim. According to his letter, he's accepted a position with Meridian Global, the very company I'd fought so hard to keep from acquiring Pinnacle. The company connected to Vanessa Chen. But why? The question came out as barely a whisper. "He knows what they tried to do." "I don't know," Garrett replied. "But we need to address this immediately. The board is assembling for an emergency, meeting at noon." I promised to be there, then ended the call. For several minutes I sat immobile in the silent house. Yesterday I had been so certain of my righteousness, so confident in my strategic victory. Today, I faced the devastating reality that in protecting Pinnacle from external threats, I had created an internal one far more dangerous. A son so hurt and angry that he would betray everything his father and I had built, just to prove he could make his own choices. For the first time in my life, I had no plan, no clear path forward. The company was in jeopardy. My relationship with Marcus seemed irreparably broken. Everything I had worked for over the past 30 years was unraveling, and I had no one to blame but myself. The emergency board meeting was a blur of concerned faces and urgent questions. I sat at the head of the conference table, my rightful place as majority shareholder, though it felt strange after decades of hiding in the shadows. Lawyers outlined potential legal actions against Marcus for intellectual property theft. The CFO presented worst-case financial scenarios if Meridian brought a competing product to market. Security experts detailed immediate protection measures for our remaining proprietary information. I listened to it all with a strange detachment, as if watching the scene from somewhere outside my body. "Eleanor?" Garrett's voice cut through my huzz. "We need your decision on how to proceed." All eyes turned to me expectantly. These people, Pinnacle's leadership team, had just discovered that their reclusive majority owner was a retired school teacher, and that the trusted COO they'd worked alongside for years had absconded with valuable company secrets. Yet here, they were, still looking to me for guidance. "I need to speak with my son," I said finally. The corporate counsel frowned. "With respect, Ms. Reynolds, any communication could compromise our legal position. Let us handle this through proper channels." "Marcus isn't just an employee who stole trade secrets," I replied firmly. "He's my son, who believes I've betrayed him his entire life. This isn't just a corporate crisis. It's a family one." The room fell silent. "Give me 24 hours, I continued. "If I can't resolve this personally, we'll pursue whatever legal remedies are necessary." Reluctantly, the board agreed. As the meeting adjourned, Garrett pulled me aside. "What are you planning?" he asked quietly. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But escalating this into a legal battle will destroy any chance of reconciliation with Marcus. There has to be another way." Back in my hotel room, I tried calling Marcus repeatedly. Each call went straight to voicemail. I sent texts that showed as delivered but remained unread. I even emailed his personal account, pleading for just 10 minutes of conversation. Nothing. By evening, desperation drove me to do something I'd never done before. I called Thomas Holloway at Meridian Global. "Ms. Reynolds," he answered smoothly. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I need to speak with my son. I'm afraid Marcus is unavailable at the moment. He's in meetings with our R&D team, sharing some rather impressive innovations." The casual way he confirmed Marcus's betrayal made my blood boil. "Tell him this dispute doesn't need to become a legal nightmare. We can work something out." "I believe the time for family negotiations has passed," Holloway replied with false sympathy. "Marcus is quite determined to make his own way now, separate from your influence." After ending the call, I paced the hotel room, feeling trapped and helpless. The corporate machinery I'd helped build was poised to crush my son. The legal team would file injunctions by morning. Marcus's career would be tainted forever, even if he somehow prevailed. And our relationship, already fractured, would be completely destroyed. I couldn't let that happen. But what alternative did I have? As darkness fell over Seattle, I found myself drawn to the small balcony of my hotel room. Below, the city lights twinkled in the clear night air, the earlier rain having washed everything clean. Across Elliott Bay, the distant shore formed a necklace of golden lights. Somewhere out there was my son, angry, hurt, making destructive choices that he couldn't possibly understand the full consequences of. just like I had done 30 years ago when grief over James's death led me to hide the truth from our child. The realization hit me with stunning clarity. Marcus and I were more alike than either of us had ever acknowledged. Both stubborn, both protective of our independence, both willing to make drastic choices when we felt cornered or betrayed, and both capable of tremendous love, though we often showed it in the most misguided ways. I returned inside and opened my laptop. If Marcus wouldn't speak to me directly, perhaps there was another way to reach him. I began typing, pouring out everything I'd never told him, about his father's final days, about my fear of failing as a single mother, about the crushing weight of responsibility I'd felt. I wrote about my early struggles to develop James's technology while working multiple jobs and raising a child, about nights spent at the kitchen table, teaching myself engineering principles from borrowed textbooks, about the day the first patent was approved and how I'd wept because James wasn't there to share the triumph. Most importantly, I wrote about why I'd kept Pinnacle separate from our daily lives. Not to control him, but to free him. To give him the chance to discover his own passions without the pressure of a predetermined path. To ensure that when he eventually took the reins of his father's legacy, he would do so from a place of earned confidence, not entitled obligation. It was nearly dawn when I finished the letter, 12 pages of raw, unfiltered truth. I read it through once, resisting the urge to edit or soften the most painful admissions. Then I attached it to an email with a simple subject line. The truth I should have told you years ago. After sending it, I made one more call, not to Marcus, but to Alan Mercer, the colleague who had helped me refine James's original designs all those years ago. Eleanor? He sounded surprised to hear from me. It's 5 a.m. I need your help, Alan. It's about Marcus. I explained the situation briefly, then outlined what I needed him to do. As James's former research partner and Marcus's occasional mentor, Alan occupied a unique position of trust with both generations of the Williams family. That's a significant risk, he said when I finished. Are you sure? No, I admitted, but it's the only way I can think of to reach him. After hanging up, I stepped back onto the balcony. The first light of dawn was breaking over the cascade. Mountains, painting the sky in delicate pinks and golds. A new day. Perhaps, if I was very lucky, a new beginning as well. I showered and dressed carefully, choosing a simple blue blouse that James had always loved. Then I called Garrett to inform him of my decision. Cancel the legal proceedings, I instructed. I'm taking a different approach. Eleanor, are you sure? The board won't be happy. I'll handle the board. This is my company and my son. Trust me. By 9 o'clock, I was in a car heading north along Interstate 5, following the directions Alan had provided. My heart pounded with anxiety, but for the first time since the confrontation in the Pinnacle conference room, I felt something else stirring beneath the fear and regret. Hope. Small and fragile, but unmistakably present. Whether it was justified remained to be seen. Alan's directions led me to a waterfront property in Mukilteo, about 40 minutes north of Seattle. The modest cedar-sided house sat perched on a bluff overlooking Puget Sound, partially hidden by towering Douglas firs. It was the kind of peaceful retreat that James would have loved. Natural, unassuming, with breathtaking views of the water and distant Olympic mountains. I sat in my parked car for several minutes, gathering courage. According to Alan, Marcus had spent the night here rather than at a hotel or at Meridian's corporate housing. This was Alan's personal vacation home, a place where Marcus had occasionally joined him during college summers to work on engineering projects away from academic pressures, a sanctuary of sorts, where my son had gone to make sense of his shattered reality. Finally, I approached the house and knocked on the weathered front door. No response. I was about to knock again when I noticed movement down a wooden staircase that led to the beach below. Shielding my eyes against the morning sun, I could just make out a solitary figure standing at the water's edge. Marcus. The stairs were steep and damp from the previous day's rain. I descended carefully, one hand gripping the railing, the other clutching the leather portfolio I'd brought with me. As I neared the bottom, the wind carried the sound of my footsteps across the pebbled beach. Marcus turned. Even from 50 feet away, I could see the exhaustion etched on his face. He'd clearly slept as poorly as I had. For a moment, he seemed frozen in place, watching my approach with an unreadable expression. Then he turned back toward the water. At least he didn't walk away. I took that as permission to continue. I stopped about 10 feet behind him, close enough to speak without shouting over the gentle lapping of waves, far enough to give him space. "Alan told me I'd find you. Here," I said simply. Marcus nodded without turning. "I should have known he'd tell you." He almost didn't. The wind tugged at my hair as I gazed out at the slate-gray water. I had to convince him it was the right thing to do. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the cry of gulls and the rhythmic sound of small waves meeting shore. Finally, Marcus spoke. "I got your email." His voice was flat, drained of the anger that had fueled our last conversation. All 12 pages of it. My heart skipped. "Did you read it?" 3 times. He bent to pick up a smooth stone, turning it over in his palm. "There's a lot to process." "I know." I took a tentative step closer. "I should have told you everything years ago, Marcus. Not just about Pinnacle, but about your father. About who he really was. Who we were together." Marcus skipped the stone, across the water's surface. 1, 2, 3 jumps before it disappeared beneath the waves. "Why didn't you?" It was the question I'd been asking myself for days. The question that had haunted me through sleepless nights and tear-filled mornings. "At first, it was grief," I said softly. "After your father died, I could barely function. The thought of trying to explain to a 4-year-old child who his father had been, the brilliance, the vision that the world had lost, it was overwhelming. So I simplified. I made him accessible to you in the only ways I could manage." Marcus picked up another stone. "And later, when I was old enough to understand?" "Later, it was fear," I admitted. "Fear that you would feel crushed under the weight of his legacy. Fear that you'd feel obligated to follow in his footsteps rather than discovering your own path. And yes, fear that you might resent me for keeping you in the dark for so long." The stone sank without skipping this time. Marcus's shoulders tensed, then relaxed on an exhaled breath. "You should have trusted me." "I know that now." I moved to stand beside him, both of us facing the water. "The irony is, I thought I was protecting you from exactly what happened, the pressure of living up to your father's genius. But by hiding, I created something much worse." He glanced at me sideways. "A son who had no idea who he really was, who felt betrayed when he discovered the truth." I nodded, my throat tight with unshed tears. "I'm sorry, Marcus. Truly sorry." For several long moments, we stood in silence. A ferry appeared in the distance, making its way toward the nearby terminal, white wake spreading behind it like unfurled wings. "I read your email 3 times, Marcus finally said, "because I couldn't believe some of it. You teaching yourself fluid dynamics at the kitchen table after I went to bed? Working 3 jobs while developing Dad's patents?" He shook his head in disbelief. "It doesn't match the mother I thought I knew." "She was both," I said simply. "The elementary school teacher who made you breakfast every morning and checked your homework every night, and the woman who built Pinnacle piece by piece in whatever hours remained. Why the separate identity? Why Eleanor Reynolds instead of Williams?" "I smiled faintly. "Initially, it was practical. A single mother in the male-dominated world of engineering and venture capital. I wasn't taken seriously. Using my maiden name and conducting most business remotely gave me a clean slate." I paused. "Later, When you were older, it became a way to keep those worlds separate, to make sure you never felt like your successes were linked to my position. Marcus turned to face me fully. And when I applied to Pinnacle, got the job, worked my way up to COO, you still kept the secret. That was my biggest mistake, I acknowledged. I told myself I was waiting for the right moment, that you needed to feel secure in your own accomplishments first, but the truth is, the longer I waited, the harder it became to imagine how you would react. I met his gaze directly. I was a coward, Marcus. I was afraid of losing you. Something in his expression shifted. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps understanding. I brought something for you, I said, opening the portfolio I'd carried down to the beach. From it, I withdrew a weathered, leather-bound notebook. This was your father's, his original designs for the water filtration system in his own handwriting. Marcus took it with reverent hands, his fingers tracing the worn cover. As he opened it, his father's distinctive script filled the pages, equations, diagrams, hurried, notes and margins. James's mind, preserved on paper. "I've never seen this," he whispered. "There's more," I continued, withdrawing a stack of photographs. "These are from the early days, your father in his workshop, the first prototype, you sitting on his lap while he worked." Marcus flipped through the photos slowly, his eyes wide with discovery. In one, James held a toddler-aged Marcus on his shoulders, both of them laughing in the sunlight of a long-ago summer day. "I don't remember this," he said, voice thick with emotion. "You were too young." "But he adored you, Marcus. Everything he created, every idea he pursued, it was all for a better world that you would inherit." As he continued through the photos, he paused at one showing a much younger version of me hunched over technical drawings, calculator in hand, surrounded by engineering textbooks. "This was after," I explained quietly. "After your father died, when I was trying to understand his work enough to complete it." Marcus stared at the image for a long moment. When he looked up, his expression had transformed, as if seeing me, truly seeing me, for the first time in his adult life. "You did all of this while raising me alone?" I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. He turned back to the water, clutching the notebook and photos against his chest. The silence between us now felt different, charged with revelation, with new understanding. Finally, he spoke again. "I called Holloway this morning. I told him I've changed my mind about joining Meridian." Relief washed through me. "And the prototype plans?" "Still secure. I downloaded them, but I never shared them." He met my eyes. "I was angry, Mom. I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt. But I couldn't actually betray Dad's legacy, not even to spite you." In that moment, I saw not just my son, but James's son, principled even in pain, his moral compass ultimately stronger than his anger. I'd been right to protect Pinnacle's future by entrusting it to him, even if my methods had been deeply flawed. "What happens now?" I asked softly. Marcus looked down at his father's notebook, then back at the horizon. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I think I'd like to hear more about him. About both of you. The real story, not the simplified version. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. I'd like that," I said, my heart lifting with fragile hope. "I'd like that very much." The beach had changed us, Marcus and me. Not instantly, not completely, but something fundamental had shifted between us as we stood by the water's edge, his father's notebook clutched in his hands. We left Mukilteo separately that day. He needed more time, he said, to process everything. I understood. 30 years of secrets couldn't be untangled in a single conversation. 3 days later, I received a text. Meeting with Holloway canceled. Not joining Meridian. 6 simple words that lifted a mountain of worry from my shoulders. The next day, another message. Returning to Pinnacle Monday. In what capacity TBD? Again terse, still guarded, but a step forward nonetheless. I gave him space, resisting the maternal urge to push, to seek immediate reconciliation. This new relationship between us would have to develop at its own pace, following its own rules. No more manipulation, however well-intentioned. No more protective half-truths. When Monday arrived, I watched through my office window as Marcus entered Pinnacle's headquarters, nodding briskly to colleagues who greeted him with obvious relief. He'd been missed during his brief absence. The board had been informed only that he was reconsidering his options, following the revelations about company ownership. The truth about his nearly joining Meridian had been kept between Garrett, Alan, and myself. Mid-morning, he knocked on my office door. The formality stung. This son who once ran into my classroom after school, who called every Sunday during college, now standing rigid in a doorway seeking permission to enter. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked, his expression carefully. Neutral, of course. I gestured to the chairs across from my desk, then thought better of it. "Actually, let's use the conference room. More comfortable." He nodded and followed me down the hall to the small executive conference room with its wall of windows overlooking Elliott Bay. We sat at the round table, an empty chair between us, close enough for conversation, distant enough for safety. "I've been thinking," Marcus began, his hands flat on the table. "About my role here at Pinnacle." I waited, giving him space to continue. "I can't go back to being COO. Not immediately." His gaze was steady, his voice firm. "It wouldn't feel authentic." I nodded slowly. "I understand. But I don't want to leave either." He leaned forward slightly. "This company is part of my heritage. Dad's legacy. I see that now." Relief washed through me, though I kept my expression measured. "What would you like to do instead?" "I'd like to spend time in R&D. His eyes showed the first spark of genuine enthusiasm I'd seen since our world exploded. "Working directly with the water filtration technology, understanding it from first principles, the way Dad designed it." The request made perfect sense. Marcus needed to connect with his father's work directly, not through executive summaries and quarterly reports, but through the mathematics and engineering that had been James's passion. "Of course," I agreed. "We can arrange a temporary reassignment. The board will hold your position for if you decide to return to it." "Thank you." He hesitated, then added, "I'd like to see Dad's original patents, the complete technical documentation." "I'll have everything transferred from the archives," I promised. "There's more than you might expect. Your father was meticulous about documenting his process." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Like father, like son. My team always complains about how detailed my project requirements are." This small connection, this tiny inherited trait, felt precious, a thread connecting 3 generations of Williams' innovation. For a moment, we shared a look of understanding, before the walls came up again and Marcus returned to business. "There's one more thing," he said, straightening. "Vanessa." My expression must have darkened at her name because he quickly continued. "She's gone, completely, but there might be legal implications we need to address." "Our security team has changed all access protocols," I assured him, "and our legal department is prepared to pursue action if she attempts to use any confidential information she might have gleaned during her time here." Marcus looked relieved but still troubled. "I still can't believe I didn't see through her." "She was very good at what she did," I said gently. "And you had no reason to be suspicious." "I trusted her," he said quietly. "I let her turn me against you." The pain in his voice made my heart ache. "You made decisions based on the information you had at the time. We both did." He nodded, though he didn't look entirely convinced. "I should get going. The R&D team is expecting me at 11. As he stood, To leave, I took a chance. Would you like to have dinner this week? Nothing formal, just to talk? He paused at the door, considering. Maybe Sunday? I could come to your place. Sunday would be perfect. After he left, I sat for a long time looking out at the water, thinking about all the Sunday dinners we'd shared over the years, from his childhood when I'd make his favorite spaghetti and meatballs after church, through his teenage years, when conversation was minimal but presence still mattered, to his adult visits home during holidays. Simple meals that had anchored our relationship through changing seasons. Perhaps they could serve that purpose again. The temporary apartment I'd found in Queen Anne was small but comfortable, with a decent kitchen and a living room that offered a partial view of the Space Needle. By Sunday afternoon, I had managed to unpack enough to make it feel somewhat homey. Pictures on the walls, books on shelves, the familiar scents of homemade bread and roasting chicken filling the space. Marcus arrived precisely at 6, a bottle of wine in one hand and a small potted plant in the other. A housewarming gift, he explained, setting the cheerful yellow kalanchoe on the kitchen counter. The woman at the nursery said it's nearly impossible to kill. A vote of confidence in my gardening abilities, I noted with a smile, accepting both gifts. Thank you. Dinner began awkwardly. Too much politeness, too many careful questions about work and weather. But as we ate, the familiar rhythm of sharing a meal gradually softened the tension. By dessert, apple crisp, his childhood favorite, Marcus had relaxed enough to ask the question I sensed had been on his mind all evening. When did you decide to keep the company a secret from me? I set down my spoon, considering how to answer truthfully. It wasn't a single decision, more a series of choices that built on each other. I looked at him directly. Initially, there was no company to hide, just me trying to develop your father's patents while working whatever jobs would pay our bills. And later, when Pinnacle was established, you were 8 when Garrett and I officially founded the company. I thought about telling you then, but I sighed. You were just beginning to talk about your father without crying. I was afraid that introducing something as complicated as patents and corporate ownership would reopen wounds that were finally healing. Marcus nodded slowly. And when I was older? In high school? College? By then, I'd created this completely separate professional identity. Eleanor Reynolds existed in conference calls and legal documents, while Eleanor Williams picked you up from soccer practice and attended parent-teacher conferences. I spread my hands helplessly. The longer it went on, the harder it became to imagine merging those two worlds. Were you ever going to tell me? Yes, I said firmly. I had planned to tell you this Christmas, actually. I swallowed hard. I thought moving in with you, spending more time together after my retirement, would create the right opportunity. I never imagined Vanessa would enter the picture, or that you would ask you to leave, he finished quietly. My timing was impeccable, wasn't it? A small, sad smile passed between us, acknowledgement of the painful irony. You know what bothers me most? Marcus set down his wine glass. Not that you kept Pinnacle a secret, but that you kept Dad a secret. The real Dad, the inventor, the visionary. All these years I thought he was just an ordinary guy who died too young. He was extraordinary, I agreed softly. But I think I was afraid that if I told you too much about his brilliance, it would either overwhelm you with expectations or make his absence even more painful. Instead, I had to discover my father in fragments, through company archives and old notebooks. There was hurt in his voice, but understanding too. I wish I'd known him through your eyes all along. That night marked the beginning of a new pattern between us. Sunday dinners became a regular tradition, sometimes at my apartment, sometimes at restaurants around the city. Each week I would bring something from the past, a photograph, a letter, one of James's sketches, and share another piece of our history. Marcus absorbed it all with quiet intensity, asking questions, making connections. Often, he would take notes, as if creating a map of the father he had barely known and the mother he was finally coming to understand. At Pinnacle, meanwhile, his temporary position in R&D had evolved into something more purposeful. He'd assembled a small team focused specifically on adapting the company's high-end water filtration technology for humanitarian applications, creating simpler, more affordable versions that could be deployed in regions with limited infrastructure. 6. Weeks after our first Sunday dinner, he invited me to visit the R&D lab. The space hummed with activity. Engineers huddled around workstations, prototypes in various stages of development lined the shelves. Marcus led me to a corner where a particular model stood on a testing platform. "This is what I've been working on," he explained, his eyes bright with enthusiasm. "We're calling it the Williams Basic Filtration System." I examined the device, simpler than our commercial models, but recognizably built on the same principles that James had outlined in his original patents. "It costs 1/10 what our standard systems cost to produce," Marcus continued, "and it can be assembled with basic tools, maintained by users with minimal training." "It's remarkable," I said, genuinely impressed. "The developing markets team will be thrilled." "That's just it." Marcus hesitated. "I don't want this to be a profit center. I want to establish a foundation, a separate entity that would deploy these systems in communities that need them most." I looked at him in surprise. "That would require significant funding." "I know." He met my gaze steadily. "I was hoping the majority shareholder might consider a special allocation." For a moment, I couldn't speak. This wasn't just about technology or business strategy. This was my son reaching for his father's original vision. Clean water for all, not just for those who could afford it. It was James's dream, reimagined by the son who had found his way to it through his own path. "I think," I said when I found my voice, "that the majority shareholder would be honored to support such an initiative." The smile that spread across Marcus's face was worth every difficult moment of the past months. For the first time since our confrontation in the Pinnacle conference room, I saw genuine joy in his eyes, not just professional satisfaction, but personal fulfillment. That afternoon, as we walked back to the executive offices together, a curious thing happened. Several employees we passed did double takes, glancing between us with expressions of dawning recognition. "They're finally seeing it," Marcus murmured, amused. "Seeing what?" "The family resemblance. Now that they know you're my mother, they can't unsee it." He was right. Now that my dual identity was known within the company, people were connecting dots they'd never noticed before. The similar mannerisms, the shared expressions, the way we both tilted our heads when considering a problem. "We should take a formal portrait," I suggested impulsively, "for the company archives. Mother and son, finally in the same frame." Marcus considered this, then nodded. "I'd like that." 2 months after our reconciliation on the beach, we held the first official board meeting with both Eleanor Williams Reynolds and Marcus Williams present in their true capacities. I as founder and majority shareholder, he as head of the newly established humanitarian division. As Marcus presented his vision for the Williams Foundation, I watched the faces around the table, initial skepticism giving way to genuine interest, as he outlined a business model that balanced purpose with practicality. He had his father's vision, but my pragmatism, and the combination was compelling. When the presentation ended, Garrett was the first to speak. "I think James would be proud of this direction," he said, looking between us. "Of both of you." The board voted unanimously to approve the initial funding. As the meeting adjourned, I found myself overwhelmed with emotion, not just pride in my son's accomplishment, but a sense of completion, as if pieces long separated were finally coming together. Marcus must have sensed it, because as we walked out together, he said quietly, "Are you okay?" More than okay, I assured him. Just thinking about how your father would feel, seeing you carry his work forward like this. He was silent for a moment, then said, I wish I remembered him better. You're more like him than you know, I told him. Not just in how you think or what you create, but in what matters to you, in your heart. That evening, Marcus didn't return immediately to his own apartment after our celebratory dinner. Instead, we sat in my small living room, looking through old photographs, talking about the future of the foundation, comfortable in a way we hadn't been in years, perhaps ever. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. I've been thinking about something. What's that? When you were living at my house, before everything happened, you mentioned wanting to visit Minnesota to show me some places from when I was little. My heart quickened. I remember. I thought maybe we could do that. When things settle down with the foundation launch, go back together. The suggestion, this willingness to revisit our shared past, to create new memories alongside the old, felt like a gift I hadn't dared hope for. I'd love that, I said simply. Good. He nodded, decisive. It's time I really understood where we came from, all of it, not just the simplified version. As I closed the door behind him, I leaned against it, overcome by a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades, wholeness. The carefully separated compartments of my life, mother, teacher, businesswoman, were finally merged into a single, integrated identity. Eleanor Williams Reynolds, in full. And my son was beginning a similar journey of integration, discovering how his independent choices had unknowingly aligned with his heritage, how his future could honor his past without being limited by it. We're both, in our own ways, becoming more fully ourselves. 18 months after Marcus asked me to leave his house, I stood at the edge of a small village square in rural Kenya, watching as water flowed from newly installed spigots for the first time. Women who had once walked miles each day for contaminated water now filled their containers just steps from their homes. Children laughed and splashed in the clean streams, their delight transcending language barriers. This was the 5th such installation under the Williams Foundation, the humanitarian enterprise born from crisis that had, against all odds, become Pinnacle's most celebrated initiative. What had begun as Marcus's personal project had evolved into the company's moral center, a North Star guiding our corporate decisions and connecting us to the original purpose of James's invention. They're calling it miracle water, said Daniel, our local program coordinator, as he joined me in watching the scene. Though I've tried to explain it's science, not magic. The line between the two can be thin, I replied with a smile. Especially when you've never had clean water before. The African sun beat down mercilessly, but I barely noticed the heat. The joy radiating from the gathering crowd warmed me in a different way. A soul-deep satisfaction that all the boardroom victories and profit margins of my career had never quite provided. Mom! Marcus's voice carried across the square as he emerged from the filtration station, wiping grease from his hands with a rag. Despite being the foundation's executive director with a team of engineers at his disposal, he insisted on personally overseeing the installation of each new system. We're ready for the official handover ceremony whenever the village elders arrive. At 43, my son had grown into himself in ways I couldn't have imagined during those painful days of revelation and reconciliation. The angry, betrayed man who had once given me 48 hours to vacate his house had transformed into a leader who balanced corporate responsibilities with humanitarian vision. The hard edges of hurt had softened, replaced by a quiet confidence that reminded me powerfully of his father. 20 minutes later, we stood together as Marcus presented the maintenance manuals to the village council, simple, pictorial guides that would allow the community to operate and repair the filtration system independently. I watched with pride as he spoke, his words translated by Daniel, his gestures bridging the language gap with genuine warmth. "This technology belongs to you now," he told them, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. "Not just the equipment, but the knowledge to maintain it, to adapt it to your needs. Clean water isn't a privilege, it's a human right." Listening to him, I was transported back 35 years to a small Minneapolis kitchen where James had said almost the same words while sketching designs on a napkin. "Water is life, Ellie," he'd said, eyes bright with purpose. "If we can solve this, we solve everything that matters." How strange and beautiful that his son, who had barely known him, would find his way to the same essential truth. That evening, our team gathered in the compound where we'd been staying. Engineers, local staff, and community representatives, celebrating the successful installation. Someone produced a guitar, and soon music filled the warm night air. I found a quiet spot on the veranda, watching stars emerge in the vast African sky, more brilliant than I'd ever seen them in Seattle or Minneapolis. Marcus eventually broke away from the festivities to join me, 2 glasses of local palm wine in hand. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant singing, the occasional burst of laughter. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "about what Dad would make of all this." It was a conversation we'd had variations of many times over the past year and a half, revisiting James's memory from different angles as Marcus continued to discover the father he'd barely known through stories, photographs, and his own work extending James's legacy. "I think he'd be amazed," I said, sipping the sweet wine. "And incredibly proud, especially of you." "Of both of us," Marcus corrected gently. "The company might have been built on his ideas, but you're the one who made it real, who kept it going. All these years." His generosity, this willingness to acknowledge my role despite the years of secrecy, still moved me deeply. "Thank you for saying that." More than a year of Sunday dinners, of sharing James's notebooks and my memories, of honest conversations about the past, had gradually rebuilt the trust between us. Not the simple trust of mother and child, but something more nuanced. An adult relationship tempered by hurt, but strengthened through forgiveness. "I never thanked you properly," Marcus said unexpectedly. "For what?" "For not telling me the truth sooner." When I looked at him in surprise, he smiled. "I know how that sounds, after everything. But I've been thinking about it a lot lately. If I'd known from the beginning that I was the heir to this company, this technology, would I have pushed myself as hard? Would I have developed the same skills, the same drive?" The question was one I'd asked myself countless times over the decades, using it to justify my continued secrecy. Hearing it from Marcus's own lips was a vindication I hadn't known I needed. "You might have chosen a completely different path," I acknowledged. "Medicine, law, teaching. I might never have discovered my passion for water systems on my own." He gestured toward the filtration station visible in the distance. "Might never have been drawn to environmental engineering without even knowing why." I thought of the many ways our lives might have unfolded differently. Marcus growing up with wealth and expectations, perhaps becoming entitled rather than driven, passive rather than innovative. There would have been benefits, certainly, but also significant costs. "Your methods were unorthodox," he continued with a wry smile. "But the outcome wasn't wrong. I found my way to where I was meant to be, just not in the way either of us expected." I remembered the frightened young widow I'd been, making impossible choices with limited information, doing the best I could with the resources at hand. "Parenting doesn't come with a manual," I said softly. "We all just do what seems right at the time and hope it works out." "Well, it worked out." Marcus raised his glass in a small toast. "Eventually." The next morning, as our team prepared to head back to Seattle, I took one last walk through the village. Women lined up at the new water station, filling containers, with clean water that would no longer make their children sick. A young mother, baby strapped to her back, showed an elderly woman how to operate the faucet properly. the simple technology was already being integrated into the community's daily rhythms. One elderly woman, her face mapped with decades of hardship and wisdom, caught my eye and smiled, a moment of connection that transcended language and culture. She gestured to the water flowing from the tap, then pressed her hand to her heart, a universal expression of gratitude. This was James's legacy, I realized, not just the technology or the company, but its purpose, making life better for people he would never meet. And now it was Marcus's legacy too. And mine. On the long flight home, while Marcus slept in the seat beside me, I reflected on the strange winding path that had led us here. From a young widow scrubbing dishes to make ends meet, to a teacher leading double lives, to the revealed owner of a global company, each version of me had been necessary, each shaped by the circumstances and choices of that moment. The same was true for Marcus, from the little boy who didn't know his father's brilliance, to the angry son who felt betrayed by decades of secrets, to the purposeful man who now led our company with vision and integrity. We were not defined by single moments or decisions, but by how we integrated all of our experiences, even the painful ones, into who we became. 6 months after our return from Kenya, I stood at the window of my office at Pinnacle headquarters, watching rain streak the glass. Seattle in November, gray, misty, the antithesis of the African sun we'd left behind. Yet there was beauty in this familiar landscape too, in the evergreen trees that remained vibrant despite the gloom, in the distant mountains occasionally visible through breaks in the clouds. A knock at my door interrupted my contemplation. Marcus entered, carrying a slim folder. "The board just approved the Southeast Asia expansion," he announced, satisfaction evident in his voice. 3 new filtration stations in rural Vietnam next spring. "That's wonderful news," I said, genuinely pleased. The Williams Foundation was growing faster than we'd dared hope, fueled by Pinnacle's continued commercial success and increasing corporate partnerships. "There's something else." He handed me the folder. "The nomination committee's recommendation for the next CEO. They're presenting it at tomorrow's meeting." I opened the folder with curiosity. As current CEO, I'd announced my intention to step down in the coming year, ready to transition to a less demanding role as board chair. The succession planning had been underway for months, with several strong internal candidates under consideration. The name on the recommendation letter made me look up in surprise. "You?" Marcus nodded, his expression a complex mixture of pride and uncertainty. "They approached me last month. I told them I needed to think about it." "And have you?" I asked carefully. 2 years ago, he had been COO, positioning himself for exactly this opportunity. Then had come the revelations, his brief defection to R&D, and the creation of the foundation. His path had seemed to diverge from traditional corporate leadership. "I wasn't sure at first," he admitted, settling into a chair across from me. "I thought accepting would look like I was just claiming my birthright after all." "Exactly what you tried to prevent by keeping the company secret." I set down the folder. "What changed your mind?" "I realized I'm not the same person I was 2 years ago." He smiled slightly. "The man who was COO then wanted the title, the power, the validation. The man I am now wants to integrate what we've built with the foundation into Pinnacle's core identity." The wisdom in his perspective struck me deeply. Without our crisis, without the painful revelations and necessary reconciliation, neither of us would have grown in quite this way. What had seemed like destruction had actually been transformation. "The board is unanimous," I noted, glancing back at the recommendation. "That's unusual for a CEO selection." "Apparently, my work with the foundation has impressed them more than my executive experience," he said with a hint of irony. "They see the humanitarian initiative as Pinnacle's future, a way to balance profit with purpose." "Your father would be so proud," I said, emotion tightening my throat. To see his original vision expanding this way? Marcus nodded, then asked quietly, "And you? What do you think?" The question carried weight beyond professional assessment. He was asking if I trusted him with James's legacy, with the company I'd built from nothing, with the future I'd safeguarded for so long. "I think," I said with complete conviction, "that Pinnacle couldn't be in better hands." Relief and gratitude washed across his features. "Thank you. That means everything." Later that afternoon, we walked together through the R&D department where the next generation of filtration technology was being developed. Engineers nodded respectfully as we passed, many still slightly awed by the founder and son narrative that had transformed company folklore. "You know what's ironic?" Marcus said as we paused to examine a prototype. "If things had gone according to Vanessa's plan, if I'd moved you out and proceeded with the Meridian merger, none of this would exist." I considered the butterfly effect of that pivotal moment, how his request for me to leave had forced revelations that ultimately strengthened both the company and our relationship. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. "I've been thinking about that a lot," he admitted. "About what would have happened if I hadn't given you that ultimatum." "We might have continued in our comfortable half-truths," I acknowledged. "You never knowing who I really was, me never fully knowing you." "Instead, we crashed into the truth." He smiled ruefully. "The hard way." "The only way, perhaps," I suggested, "for two stubborn Williams personalities." That evening, we had dinner at my apartment, our traditional Sunday gathering, though it was only Thursday. Marcus brought the wine, I cooked his favorite lasagna, and we talked about everything and nothing. The Foundation's expansion plans, a book he was reading, memories of his childhood Thanksgivings in Minneapolis. As he prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "I'm thinking of going back to Minneapolis next month, to see the old house, visit Dad's grave. Would you come with me?" The invitation touched me deeply. We had spoken of such a trip many times, but always as a someday plan, not an immediate reality. "I'd love to," I said simply. "Good." He smiled. "There's something about becoming CEO that makes me want to reconnect with where we started, to remember why we're doing all this." After he left, I sat alone in my living room, looking at the framed photograph on my bookshelf. Marcus and me at the opening of the Williams Foundation headquarters, both of us smiling, clearly related, in more than just appearance. Mother and son, finally publicly acknowledged as such after decades of careful separation. When Marcus had given me 2 days to move out after my retirement, he'd had no idea who I truly was. The owner of his company, yes, but more importantly, a woman who had sacrificed and struggled and persevered in ways he couldn't imagine. His ultimatum had forced both of us to confront hard truths and shed protective illusions. And somehow, through the painful process of revelation and reconciliation, we had each become more fully ourselves. The next morning, as I prepared for the board meeting that would recommend Marcus as my successor, I received a text from him. "Ready for today?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Ready, and prouder than you can imagine." A moment later, another message appeared. "Couldn't have gotten here without you. In every possible way." I stood at my apartment window, looking out at the Seattle skyline, emerging from morning mist. Somewhere in that landscape of glass and steel was my son, preparing to step fully into the legacy that had once been hidden from him. Not as an entitlement, but as an earned responsibility. Not as a birthright, but as a chosen path. Have you ever been betrayed by the person you sacrificed everything for? The question that had begun this journey echoed in my mind, but now I could answer it differently. No, not betrayed, challenged perhaps, forced to confront my own mistakes. Given the opportunity to build something stronger from the broken pieces, and in that rebuilding, we had both found something we didn't know we were missing. Not just the truth about our past, but a clearer vision for our future. a chance to honor James's memory, not through secrets kept, but through purpose shared. My son had given me 2 days to move out after my retirement. He hadn't known I owned his company, but now he knew. He knew everything. And somehow, knowing the whole truth had set us both free. 5 years later, the Minneapolis winter had softened into early spring, though patches of stubborn snow still clung to the shadowed corners of the university campus. I adjusted my scarf against the lingering chill as I made my way toward the newly constructed James Williams School of Environmental Engineering. The modern glass and timber building stood in stark contrast to the century-old stone structures surrounding it, yet somehow it belonged. Innovative but respectful of tradition, much like the man it was named after. Its curved facade captured the morning sunlight, the solar panels along its roof gleaming with purpose. Today was the dedication ceremony, the culmination of 3 years of planning, funding, and construction. As I approached the entrance, I saw Marcus already waiting, reviewing his notes with the focused intensity that had become his signature as Pinnacle's CEO. At 48, my son had fully grown into his leadership role, his dark hair now threaded, with distinguished silver at the temples, his posture conveying quiet confidence rather than the anxious ambition of his younger years. "Mom," he smiled, tucking away his speech. "Right on time." Would I be late for this? I returned his smile, accepting his warm embrace. At 72, I had finally learned to accept such public displays of affection without the reflexive stiffness that had once characterized our interactions. Marcus gestured toward the building. "What do you think? Does it capture his spirit?" I studied the structure thoughtfully. The architects had worked from James's original sketches and notebooks, incorporating subtle elements of his design philosophy throughout, from the water reclamation system that made the building nearly self-sufficient to the central atrium, modeled after his earliest filtration prototypes. "It's perfect," I said softly. "He would have loved it." Together we entered the building, greeted by the university president and various dignitaries assembled for the occasion. The atrium was already filling with guests, academic colleagues, industry partners, former students from my teaching days, and most importantly, hundreds of young engineering students who would benefit from the advanced research facilities and scholarship programs established by the Williams Foundation. We moved through the crowd. I was struck by how many people approached Marcus not as Pinnacle's CEO, but as the visionary behind the foundation that had now brought clean water systems to over 50 communities across 3 continents. The corporate success was impressive, but it was this humanitarian legacy that brought the deepest pride to his eyes. Mrs. Williams Reynolds, a young woman with bright eyes and a determined expression, approached us. "I'm Carmen Diaz, one of the first Williams scholars. I can't tell you what an honor it is to meet you." "The honor is mine," I replied warmly. "Marcus has told me about your research on nanofiltration. It's built directly on your husband's original principles," she explained enthusiastically, "but applied at a cellular level. We're hoping it could revolutionize medical applications, especially in regions with limited infrastructure." As she described her work, I glanced at Marcus, seeing his father's innovative spirit reflected in this young woman's passion. This was what we had built together. Not just buildings or technology or corporate entities, but a living legacy that would continue evolving through generations of bright minds. The ceremony began promptly at 11, with Marcus taking the podium after several introductory speakers. He stood tall as he addressed the gathered crowd, his voice steady and clear. 37 years ago, my father died in this city, leaving behind notebooks filled with sketches and formulas that he never had the chance to develop, he began. But he also left behind something far more valuable, a vision of what technology could accomplish when guided by compassion and purpose rather than profit alone. I watched from the front row, my heart full as he continued. "What you see around you today, this school, the foundation that bears our family name, the global work we continue to expand, none of it would exist without two people's unwavering commitment to that vision. His gaze found mine, warm with gratitude. My father, James Williams, whose brilliant mind conceived the original technology, and my mother, Eleanor Williams Reynolds, who not only preserved his legacy but built it into something far greater than he could have imagined. A wave of applause rippled through the audience, and I felt a blush warm my cheeks. Public recognition had never been my goal, yet there was something deeply healing about this moment, about standing fully in the light after decades in the shadows. Many of you know parts of our family story, Marcus continued. How my mother worked as an elementary school teacher for 30 years while secretly building pinnacle innovations. How she protected me from the burden of expectation by keeping her role as founder hidden until I had established my own path. He smiled, a touch of irony in his expression. What fewer people know is that I discovered the truth in the most dramatic way possible by asking my mother to move out of my house right after her retirement, not realizing she owned the company I worked for. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the crowd. It still amazed me how Marcus had transformed our painful confrontation into what he now called the best mistake I ever made, the catalyst that forced us both to face difficult truths and forge a more authentic relationship. That moment of crisis could have destroyed both our family and our company, he acknowledged. Instead, it forced us to rebuild on a foundation of truth and shared purpose. The Williams Foundation was born from that reconciliation, our attempt to honor not just my father's technical brilliance, but the values that motivated it. As the ceremony continued, with the official ribbon cutting and tours of the new facilities, I found myself drawn to a quiet alcove in the atrium. There, protected behind glass, was James's original laboratory notebook, open to the page where he had first sketched the water filtration system that would eventually change millions of lives. His handwriting brought back a flood of memories. James at our kitchen table, working late into the night, James bouncing a toddler-aged Marcus on his knee while explaining fluid dynamics as if speaking to a colleague rather than a child. James in his hospital bed, pressing his notebook into my hands, making me promise to finish what we started. He would be proud, Marcus said quietly, joining me at the display. Of all of it. Yes, I agreed. Especially of you. He smiled, then checked his watch. The reception starts in 15 minutes. But there's something I wanted to show you first. Curious, I followed him down a corridor to a section of the building designated for graduate research. At the end of the hall stood a door with a simple plaque. Eleanor Williams Reynolds Innovation Lab. Marcus. I breathed, stunned. For female engineers specifically, he explained as he opened the door, revealing a state-of-the-art laboratory, with workstations arranged around a central collaboration space, with priority given to single mothers and women returning to the field after career interruptions. I stepped into the room, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of this gesture. This wasn't just recognition of my technical contributions, but acknowledgement of the unique challenges I had faced, the obstacles I had overcome while balancing parenting and professional ambition in an era far less accommodating than today. The scholarship program includes childcare stipends, Marcus continued, and flexible research schedules. The foundation board was unanimous in their support. They understand that we can't afford to lose brilliant minds just because they don't fit the traditional academic model. I turned to face my son, seeing in him not just echoes of his father, but the best parts of myself as well. The determination, the strategic thinking, the ability to translate vision into practical reality. Thank you, I said simply, unable to express the full depth of my gratitude. He squeezed my hand in understanding. It's the least we could do for the woman who showed me that the most meaningful legacy isn't built in laboratories or boardrooms, but in the lives we touch and the values we uphold. Later, at the reception, I found myself surrounded by a mixture of past and present, former students from my teaching days at Lakeview Elementary, now with gray in their hair and children of their own. Pinnacle employees who had worked with me during my dual identity years without ever knowing it. Faculty from the engineering department eager to collaborate with the Williams Foundation. Garrett Fujimoto, now well into his 80s but still, sharp as ever, raised his glass in a private toast when our eyes met across the room. Without his partnership all those years ago, none of this would have been possible. Alan Mercer joined us, leaning heavily on a cane but beaming with pride at what his friend James's legacy had become. He would have loved all of this, he told me, echoing my earlier thought, especially seeing you and Marcus working together. As evening approached, the crowd thinned, leaving just family and close friends. Marcus's wife Lydia, a pediatric surgeon he had met through the Foundation's medical outreach program, joined us with their twin daughters, 10-year-old girls with their grandfather's curious eyes and their father's determined chin. "Grandma, did you see the kids' lab?" Emma asked excitedly, tugging at my hand. "They have real microscopes, not toy ones, and a water wall that shows how filtration works," her sister Sophia added. "Dad says when we're 12 we can join the junior engineering program, if that's what you want," I reminded them, a lesson hard-learned from my own experience. "There are many paths to choose from." "We know," they chorused, with the cheerful confidence of children who had never been burdened with expectations beyond being themselves. As twilight fell, Marcus and I stepped outside for a moment of quiet reflection before the family dinner planned for later. The campus had settled into evening stillness, lights beginning to glow in windows across the quadrangle. "I've been thinking about circles," Marcus said as we stood gazing at the illuminated facade of the James Williams School. "How we started here in Minneapolis, expanded globally, and now we're back where it all began." "Full circle," I agreed. "But not the same circle, a spiral perhaps, returning to the same point but at a higher level." He nodded thoughtfully. "When I asked you to leave my house that day, gave you 2 days to move out, I had no idea how much I didn't know. About you, about Dad, about myself." "Neither of us could have imagined standing here 5 years later," I acknowledged. "Sometimes the worst moments truly do lead to the best outcomes." "Do you ever regret it?" he asked suddenly. "The years of separation between Eleanor Williams and Eleanor Reynolds? The double life?" I considered the question carefully. "I regret the pain it caused when the truth came out," I said finally. "But the path itself? No. It shaped both of us in ways we needed, though we couldn't see it at the time." A cool evening breeze rustled through the newly budding trees, carrying the promise of spring renewal. In the distance, the lights of downtown Minneapolis glowed against the darkening sky, the same city where James and I had once dreamed of changing the world, where I had raised our son alone, where that son had now returned to honor both his parents' legacies. "What would you tell her if you could?" Marcus asked softly. "The young widow scrubbing dishes to make ends meet, raising a 4-year-old alone, trying to develop patents at your kitchen table after I went to bed." The question caught me by surprise. I closed my eyes briefly, picturing my younger self. Exhausted, terrified, determined. What would that woman need to hear most? I'd tell her it gets better, I said at last, that the loneliness doesn't last forever, that all those nights studying engineering textbooks while you slept would eventually matter, that the son she worries about constantly will grow into a man his father would admire beyond words. I turned to look at Marcus directly, seeing in his face all the years that had passed, all the growth that had occurred, all the healing that had finally come. And I'd tell her that one day, that little boy will give her 2 days to move out of his house, I added with a gentle smile, and it will be the best thing that ever happened to both of them. Marcus laughed softly, then offered his arm as we prepared to rejoin the others. "Ready to go in? The girls are probably getting hungry." "I'm ready," I said, taking his arm. And I was, ready to embrace this new chapter, this continuing spiral of our family story that had somehow, against all odds, transformed secrecy into openness, separation into connection, and pain into purpose. Together, we walked back toward the light, toward the future we had built from the broken pieces of the past. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.